So with that, I'm done with my announcements. I want to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today. That is Dr. Marit Brommer, and her talk is going to be on geothermal breakthroughs, when, where, and why. So hi, Marit. As I finish here, she is the Executive Director of the International Geothermal Association and took that seat in April 2017, coming from the oil and gas sector with a decade of experience in technology deployment and geoscience portfolio management. Marit is a passionate geologist with a master's from the Free University in Amsterdam and a PhD from TU Delft. She is dedicated to transition the IGA into a professional body renowned for its geothermal expertise, networking opportunities, and global presence. In addition, she is keen to strengthen the activities with clean energy partners with a commitment to low carbon future energy mix. So with that, I'm going to give the floor to Marit. And I think Marit, did you unmute now? You're good?
I am, and thank you. Yes, thank you so much also for the very warm welcome and fantastic introduction. It's very good, very good. And your party on Friday evening, that sounds really, really nice. So I can imagine that people have signed up already. I sure have missed meeting real people, I must admit, during this
Right,
COVID.
and I think same here. So as you get set up, Marit, I'm just going to remind everyone there is a Q&A on the bottom. So as Marit's going through her presentation, feel free to submit questions. And at the end, I will jump back in and help facilitate the Q&A with Marit. So I'm going to back off now and disappear and let the floor is all yours, Marit. Thank you.
Super. Well, thank you very much, Brian. And yeah, that's actually a good point that there is a Q&A at the end. And I was asked to speak for about 35 minutes. And I'm really hoping to get some questions from you and have some engagement and interactivity, because that's also something I've missed over the past year and a half under this virtual world, that, yeah, you don't meet people, so you don't really know what's cooking in the audience for that matter. Thanks. Really thank you to AGS in general, but Brian specifically. You've been very kind inviting me to join you for your lunch today, and I think it's an honor. I think your society is a very established one, and I'm so pleased to see that there are so many students still studying geosciences. I hope that remains like that. I'm not sure whether you know a lot about the IGA. So I took the liberty to tell you in the first, let's say, couple of slides, a little bit about the IGA and what we do and how we operate worldwide. So first of all, we are an association. We are a membership-based association. So when Brian talks about sign up, these are the benefits, please join us. This is exactly what we do as well, but then globally. We have country members, so really associations or other institutes that represent their countries to join us as member, as affiliated member. For instance, in the States, there is Geothermal Rising, which is an awesome association driving the policies and driving the industry network for the USA. And they have become then a affiliated member to the IGA in order to translate all those best practices and learnings and technology pushing towards the global scale. And hence that is also our role, that we look at all the countries, we see what's going on in those countries, and then we connect that to, some best practices, industry standards when it comes down to, for instance, project management or risk or drilling the best wells, but also social licenses, for instance, in terms of how does geothermal work in a community. And I guess the beauty of the IGA is that we work in 42 countries now. We have 42 members from the country levels, from Indonesia to Chile to USA and Europe, Africa. Everybody is connected via our platform. And one of our flagship events is the World Geothermal Conference. So my background here today, we do that every 3 years. We were supposed to have one last year, but due to COVID postponed, hopefully October live this year in Reykjavik in Iceland. Besides the geothermal community, we also connect a lot of our financial partners. So banks, World Bank predominantly is one of our strongest partners. but also the Green Climate Fund and other kind of funds that look after green financing for renewable projects. Renewable is, of course, getting more and more attention these days, for which I am very, very, well, not only grateful, but also very, very welcoming for, because geothermal is seen as renewable, yet hasn't been given that much of attention. And this is also one of the major things I wanted to discuss with you today, why that is, and also how to attract more capital to be unlocked for geothermal. We also have a huge role to play as industry association with the UN, United Nations. We do all kinds of activities with the UN, predominantly outreach, advocacy against standards. And we work with the IEA, so the International Energy Agency, and IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency. So we're really a global platform, and we're trying to do our best in terms of telling the right story for geothermal, making it to the spotlight and making it on stage, and putting it out there to both educate the people, as in society, but also the community, the sector itself, because that needs to be nurtured and matured as well. I took the liberty to talk a bit about certain projects that we do as well with our partners worldwide. Currently, we work quite a bit in Africa, Ethiopia and Kenya, where there is some, from a geological point of view, and I'm a geologist myself, it's just fantastic. The rift, the African rift, ranging all the way from, let's say, Djibouti, Ethiopia, all the way down to South Africa. Well, South Africa just misses one of the hotspots, but it goes pretty long way, that African rift, that's sort of the motherhood of us human beings. But it's also very good for geothermal. However, projects in Africa can take a long time, and financing, especially capital from abroad, so third parties and private capital, risk capital, is difficult to get that unlocked for typical African projects. And we're working with a couple of groups, both from the financial side, but also project developers, and having a look at innovative schemes for investing into that first exploration well, because that is the most important well basically that needs to be drilled, because that's the most risky one at that first instance in that project, because we always have to, very similar in oil and gas, but we always have to prove our resource via the drill bit. And hence insurance comes in, and also smart insurance and sustainable investment and labeling it green. And I'm very, very happy to see that the first bonds are being accepted, and the first projects hopefully will be developed next year in Kenya, and we're eyeing now also Ethiopia to have some actual projects on the ground. So I'm very happy with that. We're also doing a lot between the synergy and the technology transfer between oil and gas and geothermal. I came from oil and gas myself as well, and I've heard from Brian that there have been a few speakers before me who also spoke on that sort of wealth of knowledge and innovation opportunities coming from oil and looking into geothermal. And I can only say amen to that, because yes, that's true. Now, geothermal is very specific in certain instances. We drill volcanoes basically, and hot sedimentary aquifers is sort of a niche for geothermal, and hence the overlap between oil and gas and geothermal never has really been taking place. But at the end of the day, it's the subsurface, it's about energy, it's about producing fluids, whether that's steam or whether that's water. That's what we do. And that's exactly what oil and gas is doing as well, meaning that there is so much to learn from each other and also so much to gain from each other. And hence we've launched a project also under, I don't know if any of you have attended that, the Pivot 2020 webinars last year. This year it will be Pivot 2021. So we're doing a sequence with Jamie Baird based in Austin University under the GEO framework, the Geothermal Entrepreneurial Organization. And as one of the programs out of that, we designed the green pipeline, looking at those needs for geothermal coming from oil, what oil could offer, and also how we could work together when it comes down to tools and technologies and drill designs and well, designs and project management and scalability. And I come to that in a sec as well. And another thing is that I'm very interested in general. Geothermal is often sort of looked at as a resource for power. And yes, we do that a lot. We have about 350 power plants worldwide, and we're doing a grand job there. But geothermal is so much more than just electricity. And something that we call direct use, or the low enthalpy and the mid enthalpy range in Celsius is sort of my metric system. So when I speak about kilometers and Celsius degrees. But if you look at geothermal resource from between, let's say, 60 to 120 degrees Celsius, it's not so good in terms of efficiency for power, but it's awesome to use it directly. And that direct use of that geothermal resource is for all kinds of applications. It can be for greenhouses, for spas and fish ponds and what have you, but also for smart energy systems for buildings and in combination with geothermal heat pumps. Now, with the World Bank under the SMAP program, which stands for the Energy Sector Management Assistance Program, it's a mouthful. We're going to do a virtual, because we're still under the pandemic rules, but we're doing a virtual study tour at the end of September, where we put a spotlight on 12 projects, facilities worldwide on all continents, telling the story of geothermal and how it's used in terms of applications, what I've shown here, like greenhouses and the fish ponds and the spas. The Blue Lagoon is, of course, a very traditional example, but Olkaria in Kenya is number 2 in the world when it comes down to attracting visitors pre-COVID, of course. And I'm very keen to beat wind and solar as well here, because they've launched an awesome global atlas. It just recently launched together with some leading GIS companies, so geospatial. So if you happen to be in geospatial, if that's your major, there is so much potential, well, for all of you out there, I guess, in geosciences, but for spatial and GIS people, I think the subsurface is going to be quite exciting to work in for geothermal as well in the coming decade. But solar did a global solar atlas, wind did a global wind atlas, and I just think geothermal needs one as well. So we're negotiating with our friends at SMAP, World Bank, to scope out a program around the global geothermal atlas. I think it's very timely. I think we know a lot of the data. We have a lot of data. We have a lot of insight in terms of, the heat maps that we have provided in terms of our countries that we work. But there is so much white space, and that's a shame, because I think if we can show politicians, for instance, the amount of heat that's stored beneath their feet, why should you only look at the sky when it comes down to solar, or feel the wind when it comes down to wind power? I mean, we can also look at the heat beneath our feet and map that and make that representative of the energy it contains. So I think that could be a major breakthrough for geothermal anywhere. To come to our scalable markets, because this is something I've always been asked, to whom do you serve? I mean, who are your clients? In which markets do you operate? And what we see in geothermal, we're really trying to picture, let's say, our end user and our markets in 2 scalable ways. One is obviously for power. That's where we play. That's where we have also an installed capacity of about 15.4 gigawatt electric across the world. As I said, we have, roughly speaking, 350 power plants, individual power plants around the world. USA is leading that game in terms of geothermal to power, specifically the states of California and Nevada, but also Texas is upcoming. So please take a look around. I think there are some amazing startups at the moment working in Texas, looking at abandoned wells or co-producing resources, and even some innovative drilling technology to unlock those hot sedimentary aquifers or reservoirs in the Texas Basin, and I think that is just awesome. In terms of heat, and that's a scalable market, the direct use market, actually, the low enthalpy, the low temperature, the 60 to 120 degrees Celsius domain. We have a lot more installed capacity there, around 72 gigawatt thermal, spread over at least 60 countries, what we've mapped around the world. And those countries are using the heat for, well, direct purposes, for their swimming pools and spas, the greenhouses. For instance, Europe is very strong on geothermal greenhouses, specifically the Netherlands, where I'm from originally. It's a country that have really embarked on a journey to look after replacing gas with geothermal to produce greenhouse stable temperatures for the crops. Power is less abundant in 20 countries, still not bad, but it's less, and that has really been geographically narrowed through the, let's say, the domain that we are coming from, if you like, within geothermal is a very Icelandic, New Zealandic, and to a certain degree Italian dominated power play, literally speaking, because it were those organic reservoirs that were tapped first. And hence that has developed the notion around, hey, we could use geothermal to power also across the world. So basically the hotspots of this world, along the extensional basins, along, you know, the typical hotspot areas, the ring of fire. As a geoscientist, you've heard of that. Typical, the ring of fire, that's where we have been producing loads of geothermal power projects. This is a very interesting map. It comes from a recent publication from Nature Geoscience, a couple of authors led by Egbert Joly, who works in Potsdam in Germany. They really combined at the data, and by the way, this could be a fantastic sort of first step for our global geothermal atlas. But what they've mapped is the heat map, basically, and the heat flow based on data, based on actual production data, but also on what we know. I mean, what we know from surface, what we've seen from drones flying around. Parts of South America has been mapped purely through drones and cameras, so the infrared cameras. And I think the interesting story here is that we know the obvious places. We know Indonesia and the Philippines. We know Iceland in the mid-Atlantic ridge. And I think, you know, for Africa, it's crystal clear that the hotspot sits in that rift system. But look at the potential for Africa in that north sort of middle bit as well. I mean, if you really think about United Nations development goals and that we want to have safe, you know, secure, clean and affordable energy to all, I think geothermal could be a game changer for half of the African continent. And equally, if you look at Asia, where besides, of course, the typical hotspot countries in Indonesia and the Philippines, where we do work quite a bit, there is so much potential in neighboring countries, in Vietnam and Malaysia, but also China, who have really taken a long run on geothermal resources in that shallow, but also in the deep geothermal domain for direct use. It's also very interesting to see what they can do in terms of replacing coal and using geothermal to clean up the air that we breathe as citizens of the world. So again, here my point is that geothermal can be everywhere as long as we know what's beneath our feet. And I think that's the exciting bit about mapping, and that's the exciting bit about having the data available to provide to project developers and politicians, because they basically set the rules of the game. I really believe that as the energy transition goes on, and I know there are differences in terms of how we look at the energy transition and how we deal with clean energy, but I think the world will come to a certain consensus, especially we've signed the Paris Agreement. We have a goal 0 in 2050. This is what we want to achieve. We want to have clean and affordable energy for all, and SDG 7, that's the goal where I strongly believe geothermal sits in mostly, because that's the goal that we all in energy working, you know, companies and us geoscientists, that we want to deliver to. And that's a fantastic sort of benchmark to look at, because clean and affordable is something you can either measure. And if you're not clean enough, you have a standard that you need to be, performing at par with. Beyond is even better. Below, you can, do something. You can look at your CO2 composition of your power plants. You can look at why am I not sustainable and clean, and do something about that. And affordability is crucial because at the end of the day, I think as a consumer, I also work like that. I mean, we don't like to overpay. If solar, let's say the levelized cost of electricity can provide power to people in Africa for $0.03 the kilowatt hour, why on earth would they pay the 7 cents that geothermal is at this moment when it comes down to our levelized cost? So I think affordability is a clear driver for all of us in geothermal to work towards and to get that affordability to a level of, let's say, at being at par with our competitors. And although I do think in complementarity, I think solar and wind have something exciting to offer in that play around power. I do think it's important that we play that game as well. We are there to provide power and we're there to provide heat for direct use of our resources. And hence that affordability needs to be mapped again. Mapping is important, needs to be mapped and needs to be evenly spread in terms of understanding our cost-benefit analysis. Just to talk you through a little bit how many end-use sectors we serve at this moment. Power is, of course, a very important one. By the way, we serve power, so we produce power to the grid. So we're often used and seen as a fantastic base load supplier of power. We're not intermittent. We have an installed capacity of 92% of the time. We have power stations that have excess electricity because we're serving so much. And you can think and spin this further in the hydrogen economy, for instance, use that excess electricity to turn that into hydrogen. If you have the right little modular electrolyzers, as Iceland and New Zealand are developing, I think that can be quite an interesting game changer for geothermal to be a part of. So off-grid is becoming more and more interesting because there are many countries in the world where grids are, let's say, not accommodating the amount of power that is being centralized right now, basically due to solar and wind being so cheap and abundant available. And hence there is a clear need to look at off-grid opportunities, and geothermal, although it is expensive in the beginning, it offers a great standalone project for your direct community to be looking into. So there is more and more emphasis on that. Second, I think it's very important to realize that we don't do only power in our plants. We have specific power and heat, so the combined heat and power plants, I should say, the CHPP, the combined heat and power plants, which use the electricity first, and then they look at how much heat is still available in that flow, and use the heat for secondary purposes, such as district heating. This is an example from Hellisheidi in Reykjavik, or around Reykjavik in Iceland, where they do both power and then they serve the heat to Reykjavik city in the district energy system. And I think that is a very interesting example, as long as you have, of course, that high and mid enthalpy range that you can utilize for multiple purposes. And more analysis show that this is actually very effective. It has almost no to zero emissions. And I'll talk to that in a sec. What's equally exciting is that in that cascaded use, we're more and more using, if there is still CO2, coming out of the brines, we're using that CO2 to be re-injected again. And I think that's sort of, the negative power plant of the future, the negative CHP plant of the future is something very thrilling for climate action goals as well. A personal favorite of mine are my geothermal greenhouses. I must admit, I find it fascinating that we can also serve, let's say, and label it around, well, sustainable food and green food. And I'm not kidding when I say that I ate the best bananas in Iceland in greenhouses, geothermally produced, of course. Yeah, nicely. It is a very fascinating thing if you experience being, -10 in the snow and you have a greenhouse that produces wonderful bananas. It is quite exciting. And I think, to have that heat trapped beneath your feet, yes, to Iceland, they have that abundantly. But think about the greenhouse. They don't need 250 degrees Celsius. All they need is 40 to 60 degrees Celsius. It's not much that those plants need. They need stability in terms of temperature. And equally, they need a bit of CO2. So if you have some CO2 in your brines, is what they do sometimes in the Netherlands as well, is circulate that across multiple greenhouse owners and use that CO2 to give a boost to the plants. So I think this circular thinking around geothermal greenhouses is something quite exciting. And I think it will also be, well, at least I hope, I have the ambition to push this further and to make this replicating in many countries across the world, not just the hotspots in Iceland and beyond. Yes, this is also a favorite, I must admit. But the geothermal spas and the geothermal tourism is booming. I'm not kidding you when I say that there is more money to be made in the leisure industry than in the power industry, in the sense that if you look at the business cases for those geothermal entrepreneurs who do power maybe, but who do geothermal spas and beauty and treatment and all that kind of things that we as human beings very much enjoy in most beautiful places, it offers something very interesting on your cash flow. And that is because you have direct happy customers. And I think this is an important aspect of geothermal. It's not going to be, let's say, serving only the SDG 7 when it comes down to clean energy and affordability, but it does give you the emotional connect that we need with geothermal, because this is also one of the reasons why we haven't been picked up in the spotlight that much over the past decades. And another area where I see a lot of interest is us geoscientists understanding that the critical minerals that we need in order to serve the energy transition doesn't come from the air. It doesn't come from the supermarket. We dig it up, we mine it out, or we get it from our geothermal brines. And those geothermal brines that are at the moment being looked at, very interesting, is Salton Sea in the States. And in Germany, we have in the Graben, in the Rheingraben in Germany, 2 projects at the moment looking at, and France, by the way, sorry, in France, in the Alsace as well, looking at the production of lithium from our geothermal brines. And you may see that as a stretch because, how do you do that? Is that commercial? Is there enough commercial benefit out of that extractive process? And I think, let's say 10 years ago, people would have said, no, thank you, but no, thank you. But I think now with the emphasis on the EV and the mobility in general, and all this emphasis on the role of critical minerals in the energy transition, the investors are in the queue to be, to be investing in those kind of projects, because once you get your hand on lithium, it's basically the new gold, meaning that geothermal could be positioned and is now being positioned as an interesting opportunity for mobility. Now that becomes a whole different market all of a sudden, where you are part of as a supply chain, because mobility, we all want to be mobile, we all want to drive and fly and train, etc., etc. So batteries is going to be a critical element, and if geothermal can deliver on that promise, I think some exciting things are to be happening. But I also am a realist. I'm an optimist, but I'm also realistic. And that is that, look, we're not doing that great either, in the sense that, yes, we have an installed capacity of 15 gigawatts electric. But if I look at wind, they are in the league of 650 gigawatt electric installed, coming in the past 20 years, from the mere 8 gigawatts electric all the way to 600 in just 2 decades. And we have produced 15 gigawatts electric over the past century, because we're that old. Actually, we're the oldest startup in the world, I guess. It's really time for us to scale. But the real problem here, in my opinion, having reviewed now so many projects and so many project sheets, and also all the conversations that I've been having, on behalf of the IGA in my role, is that the constant sort of denominator here is that our high upfront risk, it's a risky business because you can't map that easily the resource. Yeah, we have data. Yes, we have information, but can we prove that the resource is what it is? That is still risky business. And that de-risking bit sits somewhere in a prototype way because you have the enthusiasts, you have people who have a drive and ambition and think they will make it happen. You have the Icelanders and New Zealand sitting on top of a volcano, and certain parts of Africa is developed already with a few projects. But the rest of us out there is trying to constantly prove the bottom line, is trying to constantly prove that yes, the $60 million investment is going to give you some return in the long run. Because the two fundamental points with the geothermal risk dashboard is that we have a steep risk profile and not everyone in the utility industry is willing to deal with that. And second, it takes a bit of time to get your money back and to see that reward. So the internal rate of investment and rate of return, I should say, is longer than solar and wind. And that's, that's stopping us a bit. And second, let's also be very realistic here. We do not have a cheering crowd when it comes down to geothermal. People, once they understand geothermal and once they understand what it is, people like it. It's not that people don't like it, but the fact that we drill and sometimes even the frack word is used. And by the way, we don't frack, we stimulate our wells, but explain that to the average public. That we're not fracking, we're stimulating. That sort of, potato discussion that you do not want to have with your public that is about to show flags, stop fracking, get out of my backyard. Hence, the perception of geothermal is risky for financial people, but it's also risky for me. And hence the classical NIMBY, not in my backyard, very much accounts for geothermal. And as we know with the social licenses, it is very hard to gain one, but it's oh so easy to lose that. And hence, I think part of the geothermal discussion sits in better communication, better advocacy, outreach, and really educating the public, because through the public, we will get to the politics. And we need partnerships. Jamie, last year with Pivot 2020, she coined the Geothermal Decade, and I just love that. I think this is our decade. As I said, we are the oldest startup, but this is our decade. We're here. We have proven technology. We have exciting new things happening in innovative drilling and supercritical. I'll come to that later. But this is our decade. But we need to do a few things besides clear and good advocacy and communication. We really have to define our subsurface better when it comes down to geothermal. We really have to improve that visibility of the why geothermal here, why does it matter to my client, my customer, my political jurisdiction leadership. For financiers, they want to understand where to put money in, and they need to see a collective group of people that says yes to the resource because the data says it's a probability of success with a certain degree. And I think that is a partnership that oil and gas can bring. And I'm not biased coming from, I guess, myself, because this is also what I've been hearing a lot. It is about competence, and it's about understanding that the subsurface can unlock, those fluids, and we as human beings can interpret the data to a certain degree that we can adequately assess, the wrongs from the right. And hence that subsurface visibility and de-risking that bit of the value chain is crucial for geothermal. And the second point is we need to get more megawatts out of our well. Basically, drill cost will always be more or less the same. I mean, yes, we can go down in price. Yes, those more rigs will, be more competitors, will provide cheaper rigs. And I get that. I understand that, but I also think we can do so much more once we collectively lean in with the experience from oil and gas on how to produce effectively across the world from multiple basins, multiple reservoirs with similarities. That's the coining game for oil and gas, and it has been like that. And I think for geothermal, it's still too fragmented and too one-offish, if you like, to really learn from all the other assets that are there. And second, what I talked about already is scalability. We need to scale up. We need to grow up, mature, but also we need to scale, and we need to be mainstreaming basically geothermal in every type of discussion when it comes down to providing clean and affordable energy to all. And I think there is a huge role for you out there, for geosciences, for geoscientists, whether you're doing engineering or spatial, or whether you are a hardcore geologist like I am and was in my technical role. And I really believe there is a future for geosciences in the energy transition as a whole, and specifically for geoenergy like geothermal, when we're talking about storage and producing fluids and CCUS. I mean, it's geosciences and critical minerals for that matter. So please stay in geosciences and apply yourself to that energy transition and transfer those skills, even if you go and work in oil for a bit, and then you transfer over to green side, as they once said to me when I joined from Shell years ago. So I wanted to end this story with a couple of things that I think are worthwhile mentioning when it comes to why is now the time that I really think we're here to stay and we're here to scale. First, and there were three things I wanted to highlight. I can highlight so much more, but I think three things are important to sort of highlight. Also, some of it is really fresh, is really this year happening, and part of it is long-term, blueprinting the way forward. And that is about supercritical. Supercritical means we're drilling a volcano. Innovative drilling technology, I think you've had a talk from Cerify. Well, those are closed loop systems, Ever, for instance, and Sage and Greenfire. Those are all startups looking at how to get more megawatts out of our subsurface, whether we do that with the traditional setting or not. Exciting. And then there is climate action, because there's a lot of money being put in trying to make the world more carbon neutral and low carbon, and hence that working together in collaborative spirit in order to make, for instance, geothermal happening as well is quite exciting. And I have an example on that. So when it comes down to supercritical, okay, this is so cool. I mean, they've drilled in Iceland together. So Equinor is the former Statoil. It's Norwegian company Equinor. Together with Reykjavik Energy in Iceland, they've drilled a couple of years ago in a magma chamber, and they even cored part of that molten magma. And that has led to a huge science program that is now for the second IDDP, the Icelandic Deep Drill Project, being planned in the coming year. But also New Zealand has taken on a research project around supercritical. This is about, our average volcanic well produces 10 to 20 to 30 megawatts per well. This is about, adding or not adding, multiplying it by 10. So we're not talking about 10 megawatts, but 100 megawatts. We're not talking about 50 megawatt development. We're talking here about 500 megawatt development. But we're also talking about molten drill bits and sensors that get lost because they're completely burned, because you're basically drilling in a volcano. And I think it's exciting, and whether it will work in the end, hey, let's see. But I think this is the time to sort of explore that and to really, getting the bright minds to think about how we can explore that enormous heat that Earth is providing us with. I read yesterday the amazing news that Google is buying into geothermal. I say yes, big names matter, as we all know. Big names matter, and big names investing matters even more. And there is a fantastic startup, and I think they're even based in Houston, so Vervo Energy, Houston and California based, a spin-off of Stanford University, and their innovative drilling technology just got picked up by Google. And I can only say fantastic, well done. And I'm really, really excited to see where that's going, and also the buzz that will create there. But also earlier this year, BP and Chevron together announced the big investment into Ever as a startup, a Canadian startup drilling or wanting to drill in a closed loop way, whether the pipes are connected horizontally or like this bird feed, which I also find fascinating, which is really interesting, because this this goes beyond the need to find always the good reservoirs. I mean, you need the heat, you still need earth as your source of heat, but you don't necessarily need to have a producer and an injector. And that could, you know, open up a whole different play for geothermal, because typically you are more or less dependent on a good reservoir in vicinity of the client, which is then the community or the grid. And if you do it off grid, you still have to have a good reservoir and a good opportunity, and a good characteristic of that reservoir. So I think this is exciting, and it's also exciting to see that oil and gas is investing heavily in that new technology. So all eyes on that closed loop game. And last, I want to give this example of you know, what's happening when you put clever people with long experience in thinking mode when it comes down to climate action. Today I saw even a Secretary of State from the US visiting Iceland. Again, this is Reykjavik Energy with a spin-off called Carbfix, in terms of understanding how to make rocks with CO2. And so geothermal on the left-hand side, the geothermal power station is producing, of course, the geothermal fluids. CO2 comes out of it and is being transported to their, you know, their proprietary Carbfix little lab, and water is being pumped up, and those two are, with their proprietary technology, is being mashed and mingled and come together as a fluid, and is being injected into the basalt. So this is Icelandic basalt, and there it takes about 2 years when the CO2 fixes from the basalt into a rock, basically. So this is CCS in a way. So we're basically storing CO2, but then we're making rocks. Now, as a geologist, you know, that is just exciting to see that happening. So they calculated today that almost 22,000 metric tons have been injected in this experiment, and this has only been, let's say, 5 to 6 years operating and testing and developing. So they're really seeing this grow 10 to 100 times folds, especially in volcanic basaltic regions where they can store CO2 and make that into stone. So I think that is another aspect of geothermal, what we can offer to the world, and I think that is just very exciting to follow that through. With that, I want to say thank you, and not only for having me here, but also to have an interest in geothermal. I also want to point out that we are indeed convening our World Geothermal Conference in October, and there is still some space left. So if you can, and if you have the ability to fly, and if you're interested to visiting Iceland and meet quite a few people in terms of the geothermal community, I would like to welcome you very much to that. For me, this is it. I thank you for your time and your energy in listening to me.
Well, thank you, Marit. We really appreciate all that you shared here today. And yeah, I mean, we're already getting some comments here. That very interesting overview. So thank you for that, Janet. I just thought we'd go ahead and transition into the Q&A while you have your slides up. Maybe they can be of assistance here. And then we can go through as many questions as we can get through, maybe in
Absolutely
5 to 10 minutes, and go from there. But once again, the Houston Geological Society really wants to thank you for taking the time to present and share with us your thoughts. So question number one, we'll get started with Rick Wall. It says, can you speak briefly about the potential of geothermal desalination in Africa?
Good point. Yes, very much. I mean, it's a topic of interest as water is, of course, becoming scarce. And I think in Africa there is not so much going on right now, but Saudi is expressing a very huge interest in using geothermal to desalinate seawater. So yes, I don't know if for technical details we can. I think it's better to do that on a later stage. Also, I'm not an expert, but typically what we do is use either seawater or use certain parts of the brines and to via that method of very similar to extracting lithium from it, but to with what's the word, where you use the, well, it's not extracting, it's that other word that I'm searching for, where you're where you're desalinating the water basically from, and so you're leaving the residue at surface, and that is either being treated as waste. So this is something very interesting, because certain brines are very suitable to do again, I need to find my my English or words here, but if you plants grow very well if you nourish them with potassium, and what's the word? Jesus, you have me on the spot here. But anyway,
no worries. I think we can move on, and then it'll probably come back to you later.
yeah.
It happens to me all the time.
Yeah. Anyway, so yes to that. It's happening. There's a lot of research on that, but it's not as active in the market yet.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. So Jim Tucker, he's got 2 points. He says, so far you've talked about utility scale and some low grade direct use. He wants to know if you can expand what areas are leading in low grade ground source residential and commercial heat pumps.
Yeah, and then with areas as in markets or countries?
It seems like, I guess maybe we'll start with markets.
Yes. So the built environment, and especially the new build, so not the traditional build, but the new built environment and new residential properties, for instance, see a lot of interest for renewable technologies, including ground source heat pumps. So I think in US you have a leading company, again with Google, Desalination Energy. They have a very cool product around geothermal ground source heat pumps, really serving that sort of the new houses and the new development area. China as well. They've received a huge grant from the Asian Development Bank a couple of years ago to look at ground source heat pumps, geothermal. So not air source, but really geothermal sourced heat pumps for their new cities. And as we know in China, I mean, a city of 1 million is like a small village. These are cities of 10 to 15 million cities are being developed with loads of geothermal heat pumps. So maybe that's an answer in terms of that's what we see happening in that ground source heat pump market, and especially Asia with China leading, and in America I see a lot of movement with Google's Dandelion.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Jim's second question was just, are your slides available from the IGA?
Yeah, sure. I need to sign a form still. Yeah, but
sure,
no, absolutely. They're all free. I can share that with you. Not a problem.
Okay,
yeah.
Perfect. So yeah, we'll get that going. Thank you for that, Jim. Rob asked, if excess power is being generated, why don't costs come down more?
Yeah, I think look, that's a very good point, but excess electricity is not what's being calculated. What's being calculated is, at the end of the day, an average life cycle of 30 years for an average output per well and an average cost factor. And because we have a few, let's say, projects with over budgeted well costs, we're constantly seeing a bit of a we're still at the upper tiers when it comes down to the LCOE, the levelized cost of electricity. I also think that the excess electricity is at this moment is also caused by the surplus of other types of technology being pushed on the grid, because there is a lot of movement in certain countries for other types of renewables, such as the wind and the solar game, and hence it's only now that in certain countries there is the notion that, hey, geothermal is actually providing me already a lot. Can I not do something with that? Because it's 92% of the time it's on. So it is a recent sort of movement around that excess electricity.
Okay. All right. Next question is from Pradeep. How is CO2 contained in thermal brine? And he kind of follows it up. He says, when CO2 is transformed to solid rock in 2 years or so, when injected into basalt, then what is the life of injection well in that case?
Okay, that I have to defer to the CarbFix project. What's the life of the well? Okay, I don't know. What I can do is I will put in the to you, Brian, the link to the project, and then because there is so much more detail in the project sheets for CarbFix and all the technical and all the technical levels on that. So
yeah. Maybe I don't know if you're able to. There's a chat box in the bottom. I don't know if you're able to here. Just like post that as we go through these talks when you have a moment. That might be a good way for everyone here to get access to.
Okay, I see it. Yeah, I'll do that in a sec. Yeah.
Sure, no problem. We'll continue on with the next set of questions. Thank you for that, Pradeep. The other one is from Kurt. Do you know if there are any facilities using geothermal heat to treat and purify sewage and wastewater?
Not that I'm aware of, and certainly treats. I mean, what I do know is that there are all kinds of developments around combining waste heat, for instance, from refineries or from coal plants, and to back that up with a shallow or deeper geothermal well, depending on your location and your reservoir, and to make a combined direct use system, so basically a heating district system out of the combination between waste heat and geothermal heat. But on this sewage, no. Good point. I like it. Yeah.
He also asked one more. He said, and compositing agricultural waste was another area he was curious about.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one, and that also links to the desalination bit, because it's the compost, but it's the other word for when you make plants grow. They need this artificial,
like photosynthesis, or
yeah, no, it's like you
fertilizer.
Yes, thank you, Brian.
Thank you,
Fertilizer.
Garrett. Thank you for that, Garrett.
Yes, fertilizer.
Superhero.
Yes, Garrett, you are my my English translator, because it's getting late for me in the evening and I can only speak Dutch. So yes, no, but this is it, the fertilizer. And this is exactly, if you look at the composition of certain brines, and especially, all this, the desalination question is so interesting, because that's an area. I mean, I'm not a chemical expert at all, as you probably can hear, but it's so interesting to see what we can do, because we are geothermal industry is a resource industry. This is not just about utilities here. I mean, we're talking here about a geothermal resource, industry that can do fertilizer, that can desalinate, and hence provide water to people, and can do this agricultural compost that is also needed in order to grow plants.
Awesome. And Janet Combs asks, and I think the answer is yes, but she says, is this being recorded? Yes, it is. And will it be available? Will it be available on the HGS YouTube channel? And I think the answer is yes. You said you were going to sign the speaker release.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay, perfect. So yes.
If you think that is of use to your community, it would be a pleasure to be on your YouTube.
I think unequivocally, yes. There's a lot of interest in asking for the slides and wanting to share the talk with other people. So typically we wait 1 month after the live event, like today, to release the YouTube video, just because we want to encourage people to be here live. So a few other questions came in through chat. One is from Don Mashinsky. Hi, Don. How viable is the opportunity to retrofit oil and gas wells to become a geothermal loop system?
Yeah, I find that a good one. Look, if you look at it from an engineering point of view, I would say everything is possible. But if you look at, where oil and gas wells have been drilled, they tend to have, structurally speaking at least, always wanted to be on the upside of things. I mean, gas and oil goes to the top, and hence you do not want to be in your sort of middle point of your reservoir, or even in the low-lying bit. But for heat and for water, and I know the closed loop system is not necessarily looking for all that water, but it might not be the best configuration to start with, meaning that what you see typically in certain R&D projects around those abandoned wells is that it didn't really give enough sort of economic benefits in the end. The second point that I hear a lot, but again, I'm not an expert, and I would be happy to have a technical webinar on that also, one day. But look, the size of the wells for oil and gas, you always end in the 7, maybe 9, 10 inch. That's where you end your oil and gas wells. That's not the typical diameter for geothermal. So unless your closed loop is really phenomenal, looking at that conductive heat sort of system, which is fine, you typically have to do some workovers, because I don't think the 7-inch will give you enough sort of heat conductivity and that configuration down there. Anyway, food for thought, because of course you can tap into a wealth of not only data but reservoirs, because there are so many onshore oil and gas wells that have been drilled. I mean, it's insane. I mean, if you really map that out, you have this huge potential. But I guess it's a matter of configuring out if it really works for producing the heat that you want.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Don. Next question is from Rob. It says, on the residential front in Texas, I put geothermal ground source heat pump in my home. It costs twice as much as a traditional system. With federal tax credits, I calculated a 7-year break even without discounting. There has to be a commitment from individuals. It's a hard task in a building budget when you're talking about several $1,000s versus other building costs. I guess that's just more of a comment about appreciating the challenges around geothermal and the longer IRR, the slower that rate of return is, and the challenge that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, but look, I think this is an excellent point, because yes, with the IRR and the steep risk profile, that is maybe more related to the deep drilling and that we have to do. But this person, I mean, you're confronted with an actual reality here, is that if there is no political, neither financial incentive, it takes an enthusiast like this person and someone who really believes in the technology and thinks the 7 years is good enough, to get my money back, or at least to break even or to win. 7 years for a normal human being is already long, isn't it? Meaning that you really have to have dedicated people to do it. And that is not mainstream. That's prototyping. And that is the common denominator in geothermal. And hence that needs to be mainstreamed. Financial incentives, tax rebates, CO2 emission tags, whatever it takes, carbon reduction schemes, whatever we want to call it, that's what we need in order to drive the uptake for geothermal.
Appreciate that. Well, I think that's all the questions that we've had submitted for now. We have some more comments about the great presentation. So I just want to take the chance again to thank you for agreeing to do this with us and to graciously share your knowledge with the membership at HGS. I think we all can say it was a great presentation. We appreciate it, and we look forward to it posting to the HGS YouTube channel in a month so we can share it with our friends. I just want to thank you once again. Thank you so much, Marit, for doing this with HGS.
I thank you, and I'm happy to hear that you all enjoyed it. And I also want to wish you a very nice party on your Friday event.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think all of us around the world are a little overdue for some more socializing. So hopefully we can get COVID under control with vaccinations and just proper behavior, social distancing, or whatever you want to call it. But thank you for that, Marit. And I think with that, it is 1:03 here in our time. So just to respect everyone else's time, I want to go ahead and close up the event. And Marit, maybe